Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you're following us from. My name is Lorenzo Vidino, and I'm the director of the program on extremism at George Washington University. It's my privilege to welcome you to today's event on understanding Hizb ut-Tahrir, or HT, Party of Liberation. HT is a very interesting and controversial group, which has existed since the 1950s in the Middle East, and for decades also in the West. It has been the source of endless debates in law enforcement, academia, and policy circles when it comes to its nature, its relationship to violence, and what to do about it, the policymaking side of it. It is a group that has a presence in the United States as well. I mentioned that it's been in the West, where certain countries like the UK or Germany, where it's very well known to operate. It has a small presence also in the United States. It organizes an annual event, which normally takes place in suburban Chicago. It has a small presence here as well, but is obviously not as well known as in some European countries, and obviously as in most parts of the Middle East or Central Asia. It is, as I said, a controversial topic in terrorism studies, particularly when it comes to its relationship to violence. Some people have argued that Hizb ut-Tahrir represents the quintessential group in the conveyor belt to terrorism argument, which is in itself a very controversial topic. The argument that certain groups that are not directly violent promote a narrative that pushes people, not everybody, but is exposed to their narratives, but some people to engage in violence. Some people in academia or law enforcement argue that this argument doesn't make sense, is not backed by evidence. So there's a lot of controversy about that. There's no question that it's a group that is problematic, that adopts a provocative narrative and ideology. And so hence the debate when it comes also to its relationship to violence, the policy debate, is it a terrorist group or not? Should it be banned or should it not be banned? As most of you know, on January 19th, so just a few days ago, the British government took the decision to designate HT as a terrorist organization. This obviously comes on the wings of the weeks of very intense protests related to the conflict in Gaza, and some very extreme rhetoric coming from the protesters, and in particular from HT. In the announcement of the designation, the Home Office said, and I'm quoting here, Hizb ut-Tahrir's praise of the 7th of October attacks and associated incidents, as well as describing Hamas as heroes on their central website, constitutes promoting and encouraging terrorism. Hizb ut-Tahrir has a history of praising and celebrating attacks against Israel and attacks against Jews more widely. The UK stands strongly against antisemitism and will not tolerate the promotion of terrorism in any form. This group's anti-Semitic ideology and praise of attacks against innocent civilians in Israel outlines the necessity of its proscription. Now, the ban, of course, the British ban has triggered protests in various quarters, and not just in Islamist milieus, which would be the more natural place, but well beyond that. Many, including in academia, have argued that while HT's rhetoric might be highly problematic and abhorrent, a terrorism designation entails something else, active involvement in violent activities, something many argue HT is not doing. Some people have argued that the British government is labeling a demonstrably non-violent group as terrorist. So the program on extremism doesn't take a position on the UK ban. We tend not to be involved in this matter, take an actual position. Our job is something different, and it's that of informing the public about the matter. So informing the public about HT, what it is, how it operates, its ideology, and the different policy options that governments have adopted, so not just the UK. In order to do that, we have invited three very knowledgeable speakers who will help us in the hour we have together discuss all these matters. So let me first introduce them. The first speaker is Ghaffar Hussain. Ghaffar is a writer, a consultant, and an international speaker with expertise on radicalization and global jihadism. He previously managed the Policy Institute in London and worked as a consultant for various organizations around the world to deliver counter-extremism programs in countries such as Pakistan, Azerbaijan, the US, Denmark, and Egypt. He's also published several books, including A Brief History of Islamism and Muslim Political Thought, The Progressive Tradition. We then have Elisa Orofino, who is a senior research fellow at the Policing Institute for the Eastern Region at Anglia Ruskin University, where she leads research on extremism and counterterrorism. Elisa has long worked on the complex relationship between violent and non-violent extremism, and has recently edited a very good book about it, and has also worked quite extensively for more than a decade on HT specifically. And she's the author of the book Hizb ut-Tahrir and the Caliphate, Why the Group is Still Appealing to Muslims in the West, which was published by Routledge in 2020. We have then Felix Neumann from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Berlin, who has been working at the Department of International Politics and Security at Adenauer since June 2022. He has previously worked at the German Bundestag and the Institute for Parliamentary Research. So before going ahead and having Ghaffar start with his remarks, let me just very briefly lay out the ground rules for the hour we have together. Each speaker will start with comments that are more or less, not going to strictly enforce that, but around 10 minutes each. Then we will have, some of them will use slides for it. Then we're going to move to a round of questions. Throughout the presentation, it's possible for people in the audience to write their questions. I'm going to do my best to condense these questions and then ask them to the speakers. So ideally, the second part of the hour we have together will be a conversation among the speakers and addressing the questions from the audience. We will then wrap up at the top of the hour. I know we initially said an hour and a half, but we're going to make it a bit shorter. And so top of the hour, we wrap up. So without further ado, why don't we open with some remarks from Ghaffar. Ghaffar, the floor is yours.
Hey, Lorenzo, and welcome everyone. So Hizb ut-Tahrir. Hizb ut-Tahrir was, just to give a bit of background and historical context, Tahrir is I'd call it a pan-Islamist organization that was established in 1953. I'd say it's quite purist in its vision, in its particular interpretation of what Islamism means, in that they have a very precise plan, a very precise vision, and a very precise model of what an Islamic state looks like, which is actually very much based on the Abbasid Empire model, based on a Tariq, sorry, not Tariq, old 4th century book on the Abbasid model. But anyway, the impetus for the establishment of Hizb ut-Tahrir was the free officer movement revolution in Egypt. So up until the early 1950s, Egypt was run by the royal family, and the founder of Hizb ut-Tahrir was a Palestinian jurist called Taqi Nabhani, who was studying in Al-Azhar University in Egypt, was actually part of the Muslim Brotherhood. But in seeking to overthrow the royal family, the Muslim Brotherhood allied the free officers movement. And the idea was that they'd share power once the revolution had happened. But once the revolution did take place, the free officers movement actually cracked down on the Brotherhood and didn't share power with them. And Dr. Nabhani interpreted that as a sign of a reason why Islamists cannot collaborate with secular people. And so he established Tahrir on the back of that to say, look, we need a pure, uncorruptible Islamist organization that's not going to compromise, that's not going to ally with secular organizations, etc. And the failure of the Brotherhood in that sense was the impetus for the establishment of Tahrir. So it was important to add that the Nabhani himself is the grandson of a very prominent Muslim cleric called Yusuf Nabhani. Yusuf Nabhani himself, who wrote a lot of books, was very prolific, right? Was also an Ottoman-era judge. Actually had numerous positions in the Ottoman Empire. So within the Nabhani household, the Ottoman Empire and the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire was seen as a great calamity, if you like that. Befell the Middle East and the Muslim world. So that, I think, influences thinking quite significantly, in that Hizb ut-Tahrir posits the Ottoman Empire or Khilafah as the solution to all those problems, this kind of panacea for everything. And I think it's very much related to his family history there as well. Now, the group initially established itself as 753. They had some prominence in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. This culminated in a number of failed military coups that took place in Syria and Iraq, Syria and Jordan in particular. And after that, the party went into quite deep decline. So throughout the 70s and 80s, not a lot happened. In the 90s and noughties, they gained prominence again, mainly in two areas. Firstly, Central Asia, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Hizb ut-Tahrir kind of moved into Central Asia in quite a significant way to fill that vacuum. They even stood candidates in the elections in Kyrgyzstan for a while, which didn't quite work out. And they developed quite a following in a place called the Fergana Valley, which is a region that spans Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, who has very much its own identity and its own culture. For a while, they were very prominent in that part of the world until there was quite a brutal crackdown. And that soon changed. The other place where they had a lot of prominence was, of course, in the UK. Hizb ut-Tahrir, a number of Hizb ut-Tahrir activists started moving to the UK in the late 80s as political asylum seekers. And after the Bosnia War in the early 90s, that provided the impetus for a big recruitment effort across the UK, mainly targeting sort of second-generation British Muslims from a Pakistani, Bangladeshi background. And by the late 90s or by the mid-90s, they had quite a prominent presence. Now, during that time, Hizb ut-Tahrir also used their newfound British following to establish chapters in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So many British Muslims who joined Hizb ut-Tahrir were then encouraged to go to Pakistan and Bangladesh and create chapters there. So for a while, they were very active in South Asia. When Pakistan tested nuclear weapons in the late 90s, that was also a moment of impetus for them to heavily encourage British Pakistanis to go to Pakistan to create a chapter, because Pakistan was now seen as this place that could become an Islamic state with nuclear weapons in tow. Now, one of the issues that sort of killed HT's momentum, I would say, in the 90s was the fact that, like all kind of narrow groups, they have a lot of fissures and a lot of splinters. Just as HT was a splinter itself from the Brotherhood, they started splintering quite a lot in the late 90s. It took two main splinters. The first kind of one was a chap called Abu Rami, who was quite a senior member at the time. He claimed that the group had been infiltrated and was no longer following the Bahrani's teachings, so he kind of left and formed what's called the Nakathunis, which means the renegades in Arabic, and that became quite a major splinter which affected the British HT scene as well. So I'll say about a quarter or a third of members left that splinter. The second main splinter was when Abu Bakr Muhammad, who was then the leader of Tahrir, was actually kicked out of the party for not following party central command around keeping a low profile and picking too many fights with too many people, which was causing them problems around the world. He then left and formed what's known as Al-Mahajru, which means the immigrants, which later went on to become much more extreme. Later came with the influence of Abu Qatada and moved into the Al-Qaeda, ISIS sort of school of thought. For context, 50% of all British terrorist plots and attacks have been linked to one way or another to Al-Mahajrun, so you can see how that happened. Now, I want to emphasize a few peculiar features about HT. And I think this is really important and interesting because it distinguishes them from other Islamist groups. The first is the emphasis on Arabic. This is something that HT is very peculiar about. According to Ibn Bahani's analysis, one of the reasons why the Ottoman Empire declined is that they didn't have enough emphasis on the Arabic language. And in his view, Islam can only be instilled and implemented through understanding a deep understanding of the Arabic language. So within HT, there are very strong emphasis on learning Arabic, reading Arabic, and trying to speak Arabic, even if you're not an Arab. So this is a peculiar about Hizb ut-Tahrir. The second thing that's peculiar is they are actually a membership organization. You know, Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, these are not membership organizations. But Hizb ut-Tahrir is actually a membership organization. That doesn't mean necessarily get a card when you join, but you do have to sign, you have to pledge allegiance, you have to do a qasam, you have to pledge allegiance to the organization, that you're going to be loyal to the vision, loyal to the party structure. You can't do or say anything that the party doesn't allow you to do. And this becomes quite enough. This is where it kind of goes into slightly cultish territory. Hizb ut-Tahrir is quite cultish in that sense, where they'll marry within each other. They're very, very particular about how they behave. Many of the members will have a picture of the leader in their bedrooms, for example. And because of that cultish nature, it attracts a certain type of person, a certain person that I would say is looking to meet their social needs, has a very acute social need deprivation. Joining that group allows to fulfill this kind of be part of this tight-knit social network. The other peculiar feature is the emphasis on Khilafah, the Islamic State. Now, a lot of Islamist jihadist groups talk about the Islamic State as the end goal, but very few push it as the panacea for all the world's problems. So in a way, they could be described as Islamist utopianists. So that's probably the most accurate way of describing their vision. Like the Khilafah is the utopia. This is the goal that we need to not eventually get to, but get to immediately as soon as we possibly can. And that's why, again, Bahij is very different from other Islamist jihadists groups. They want to get to the Islamic State straight away. So with that in mind, they see themselves very much as the vanguard. And this is, again, very important because HT don't seek mass support, nor do they require mass support. They seek a particular amount of support which allows them to seize power, right? And it establish the Islamist utopian vision. So it's not a mass membership organization. The other important thing to mention is that the Tahrir have a very clear distinction between their public and their private face, which means the things they say in public, the things the members are allowed to say in public, the things they can put out in public have to be checked and vetoed, or sorry, checked and sanctioned by membership. But the discussions they have amongst themselves are very, very different in nature to the things they say in public. They make this very clear distinction between the public and the private face. And I would say the private discussions, which I've been privy to in the past, are very different to the public. Their attitudes towards certain things are very, very different, especially towards violence. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. Now, I want to touch a little bit on strategy and attitude towards violence just to conclude my comments. I've got two very esteemed speakers to come in after me as well. Now, these Tahrir are not a terrorist organization, nor are they a democratic organization. They kind of fit somewhere in the middle. People describe them as a revolutionary organization. In their own minds, what they believe they are doing is copying the Prophet of Islam's method of taking power, which in their minds relies on this three-stage model. The first stage being this private phase, where you meet individuals, you culture them, you get them to join the organization, you specifically target prominent individuals. This is one of the reasons why they have, professionals within the organizations. It's their strategy to target. They're not looking for the rank and file guy to join HT necessarily. They're looking for particular people to join HT. So they deliberately target people that they think have influence, have prestige in the community, and have that kind of gravitas. And the reason why they do that is because the private phase is about collecting members who have some role or some influence in society. Once that phase is out of the way, they move on to what's called the public phase, where they openly call for the implementation of the vision. Right? They openly start calling for it, broadcasting it, and kind of getting the message out there. And then that leads to the final phase, which is seeking nusra, which is basically seeking support from people in the military to then remove the government through a military coup and take power. That is essentially the HT model. Having said that, it's important to distinguish that they're not trying to do that everywhere. They believe that can only be implemented in certain Muslim majority countries, right? This is what they call the mujal. They're countries that have the conditions of which this can be implemented. So Pakistan, for example, after the nuclear test was considered mujal, considered a place where you can implement this revolution. Historically, that's been places like Iraq, Syria, even Egypt. There's places that they consider suitable for these conditions. In the West, as in Britain and Australia, where they have recently had quite a prominence, it's about dawah. It's about just raising support, encouraging people to join, raising the brand, encouraging people to go back to the Muslim majority country their parents came from to join the revolution there. So that's been the sort of strategy in the West. Finally, I want to touch on violence. Now, I said earlier that HT is not a terrorist organization, but it is a violent organization. And I think it's important to make this distinction between terrorist and violent. And what I mean is they don't believe that terrorist attacks are the way to seize power. That's not the strategy they want to use to get to power. However, that doesn't mean that they don't endorse violence in certain situations. So for them, when a Muslim land is occupied, and they would consider Israel, Kashmir, somebody would consider Spain by that definition, Muslim land, anywhere that Muslims have ruled in the past. If they believe that land is occupied, they believe you can engage in terrorism in order to remove the occupier, if you like. So in that context, terrorism would be justified according to HT's philosophy. And this is, again, some of the things I've said in private conversations. But in their view, the true jihad, the real violence, will come once the caliphate's been established, right? So in that sense, they do endorse and celebrate violent attacks. They just don't believe it's the best method to get to their particular end goal. So they're violent but not terrorist. I hope that distinction is useful, that makes sense. And I have a lot more to say, but in interest of time, I'll stop there.
I know you do, and there will be time for that. So thank you, Ghaffar. This is very interesting. It was a very comprehensive introduction to a very complex topic, and there's quite a lot of takeaways from your remarks. I would say definitely the centrality of the concept of khilafah, of caliphate, and I think that is a topic that, of course, became significantly more relevant by 2014 when ISIS declared it. I mean, you had a group like HT that talked about it for decades, and then it happened. And people could argue that some groundwork for that appeal for the concept of caliphate was laid in the West or in other parts by HT. Another point that I take very interesting to me is it's a bit of a factoid, but when you talked about UK activists spreading HT ideology in Muslim majority countries like Pakistan or Bangladesh, to me it's as somebody who studied Islamism in the West for a long time, a very interesting dynamic. It's a bit counterintuitive to think that Muslims from a country in which they're a minority and a relatively recent one like the UK would go to countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh to sort of re-Islamize and bring the ideology of a group like HT. And definitely very interesting your distinction between terrorist and violent group, whether it's from your point of view, and I take your point, I think I personally agree with it, not necessarily a terrorist organization, but a violent one. So they're not engaging in terrorist attacks. It doesn't mean that they do not endorse violence as a tool to achieve their goals. And I think that sort of proximity to violence to some degree, well, not direct engagement in it, but proximity to violence. You highlighted it when you talked about some of the spin-off groups that came from the HT milieu, like al-Muhajirun. It comes out of that space. So there's always that sort of proximity to it. So thank you very much for that. Again, if anybody has questions, or those attending online have questions, feel free to type them, and we'll try to address them once we finish the initial remarks. So without further ado, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will try to share my screen now. Can you see?
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic. So thanks again for inviting me today, Lorenzo, and also thanks, Gafar, for setting the scene for my talk as well. So before delving into the reach, the strategy, and the tactics of Hizb ut-Tahrir, I thought it would be very useful to say that the ban of the 19th of January marked a very important turning point, not only politically, socially in the UK, but also academically for people like me who have studied the group for more than a decade now, have written a lot on the group and always framed it as an extreme but non-violent organization, whether now by law it is a terror organization. So I guess that at least institutionally, we have now, a full shift from vocal to terror that Hizb ut-Tahrir embodies in the UK. Also, I thought I would give you, a simple fact sheet of focusing on three main points that in some way have been anticipated by Gafar, but that I have, chosen to focus on because this is what has been debated a lot, in different medias after the ban, especially in the UK. And I will focus in the UK because, of course, this is where I'm based, this is where I work, and also this is where I've conducted several analyses of the group at the minute, so far, I would say. So first of all, one of the themes that has been discussed a lot is the conflictual relationship of Hizb ut-Tahrir with national authority. But this is not something new. This is something that, as Gafar was alluding to, it's something that has characterized the group since day one, since its creation in Palestine in the 50s. This conflictual nature of this relationship is embedded in the vision of the founder, Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, who was, who had strongly anti-Western ideas, anti-capitalistic ideas, and also the group was created as a sort of a protest for justice group to counter the creation of the State of Israel. So this anti-Israel stance is embedded in the nature of the group since its very beginning, I would say. Another very important feature of the group has been its boldness against national authorities, both in Western countries, but also in Muslim majority countries. And activists and prominent members of the group have never been too shy to call Muslim leaders as apostate and Western authorities as kuffar, having therefore again a very, very problematic relationship, which led to multiple bans and persecutions in different countries around the world. But these persecutions and bans caused the transnational presence of the group in a way, because activists and leaders fled their home country, Muslim majority country, the Middle East and Palestine in the beginning, to go to mostly Western countries, where as much as they didn't like them, they were the perfect setting for them to express their opinions and also to proselytize and spread their ideologies. So in a way, the bans and the persecutions led to the transnational presence that the group has today. And in terms of numbers, I feel confident to say that Hizb ut-Tahrir is present today in at least 45 countries around the globe. We don't have official figures on the membership because in most of the countries the group is banned, especially in the Middle East. But it definitely stands as an example of transnational organization. Another point that has been debated a lot is this, caliphate, this idea of the caliphate. Ghaffar has touched upon it, so I'll just speak on some specific elements. Only majal areas, as Ghaffar was saying. So Hizb ut-Tahrir does not aim at creating a global caliphate, does not aim at enforcing the caliphate in Western countries, but only wants to reestablish the caliphate as a viable political system in the modern and contemporary world in Muslim majority countries. And this is also evidenced by the fact that Hizb ut-Tahrir is the only group having a constitution, a draft constitution of the caliphate ready, that regulates all aspects of political, social, and even economic life, and also the relationship with different groups of states, including Western states, belligerent states, evidencing the fact that the idea of the group is not a global caliphate, as some other quite well-known terror organization. Again, Ghaffar touched upon the rejection, well, not the rejection of violence, but the idea and, Hizb ut-Tahrir stance on violence. I think the group has always rejected violence as a methodology to achieve its final aim, which is the re-establishment of the caliphate. Although, when asked publicly, most of the spokespersons of the group in different Western countries have never condemned the actions of terror group, and instead they have sort of tried to focus on the misconduct of Western states, especially in the Middle East, and therefore connecting the terror act or the emergence of a terror group with, as a result, as a product of, again, Western misconduct, be it, cultural imperialism, militarism, and so on and so forth. So they have a plan. The plan is, again, to reestablish an Islamic system of government. As Ghaffar was saying, they have 3 stages where they want to, where they see this is going to happen. But violence has never been the focus of their action. Rather, it has been education. And that's where, Hizb ut-Tahrir tactics are quite interesting compared to a number of organizations who have, divided into sister organizations, maybe endorsing violence. And of course, Lorenzo and his expertise on the Muslim Brotherhood can definitely contribute to the conversation. Hizb ut-Tahrir has always had a clear approach on how to recruit members and keep members long term. And this, what I call the indissoluble bond between the individual and the movement, is basically given by, the endorsement of the Aqidah, the doctrine of the group, and the main values, the main, both terminal and instrumental values of the group, which happens mostly through halakat, through study circle. So Hizb ut-Tahrir members, all of them are, they need to attend study groups weekly. Study groups are organized according to different seniority levels in the group, but they are constantly exposed to the specific books that constitute the adopted literature of the group, which are mostly the writings of the founder Taqiyuddin an-Nabhani. This continued process of culturing to the values and the akida of the group creates a very strong social identity, which in the scholarship we define the knowledge of the person that they belong to a certain group and the emotional value that this and significance that this belonging has. And therefore, they basically very rarely leave, as Ghaffar was saying. They marry in the group, they live as members of the group for their whole life. And while studying the group for a long time, I realized that there are two main mechanisms that the group has used to consolidate the social identity of the group. The first one is self-efficacy. Having conducted multiple interviews with members of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the UK, obviously many years ago before the ban, and in Australia, they believed that HT methodology is grounded on the Prophet example, and this is the only group that has a clear method, according to them. The establishment of the caliphate is something good to work on because it's a promise from God. And also, they strongly believe that the caliphate is the only system that would work to protect the global ummah, the community of Muslim believers, because it is grounded on God-revealed laws rather than man-made laws. Another mechanism is the positive intergroup differentiation, which again makes Hizb ut-Tahrir the preferred choice, not only to join, but to remain in, because Hizb ut-Tahrir has a clear plan. Ghaffar has mentioned the 3 phases. Also, it has an uncompromising stance. Hizb ut-Tahrir has never changed their stances on, for instance, the use of violence as a method, but also the participation in political elections, which is something that the group has always not engaged with, and its longevity, which stands as an indicator of, according to the members of the group, of the reliability of the group as well as the accountability. So to sum up, these are the elements that have guaranteed the group, membership and a long-term membership in various countries. And it has survived to bans and persecutions all over the world. So what's going to happen in the UK at the minute, it's really an open-ended question, which, different hypotheses are on the ground. But looking at the history of the group, some clear trajectories are quite rightful to think about. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much. And feel free to ask me questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. I think this, together with Ghafar's presentation, gives a very comprehensive overview of the group. I think you went down to the nitty-gritty of how the group functions at the grassroots level, the membership, the meetings, the halakha, and all that, and the ideology. So that's very comprehensive. Thank you for that. And we'll get more into the aftermath of the ban, what that means. How will HT in the UK, of course, because everything is dependent on the content, the specific context, how it will react. And that's actually a response to bans or to measures by the government is something that in the West I was very interested in developing, and it's one of the reasons why I decided that somebody from Germany would be particularly interesting to have, because Germany is the Western country that has in the past, so before the UK, taken measures against HT. And Felix, it's your task to explain to us what has been happening with HT in Germany and what positions has the government taken and the whole history of it. I think that's very illustrative of dynamics that can take place in a Western country. So Felix, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Thanks also to the program on extremism and my 2 colleagues here on the panel, Ghaffar and Elisa, for your input. I'm honored to be here. And as mentioned, my task is to give you a little input on the German perspective on how we dealt with Hizb ut-Tahrir. Just a quick overview. I will give you some points about the history, then the ban in 2003, the new upswing since 2012, and some current developments. And I will try to stick to the time. short history overview. The first supporters of Hizb ut-Tahrir were around in the 1950s active, but they avoided the public eye. So they were not that active and a little bit underground and not present for the security authorities. But this changed around the 1990s, a slow process, but then Hizb ut-Tahrir became more and more active and also more aggressive. Just to mention some points they did there to give you an impression what happened. They stepped up the activities at universities, especially targeting young people, teenagers, but also students at the university to not only share their propaganda and their content and informations, but also to get new members for their own organizations. They tried to participate in the success of other Muslim organizations, but also tried to infiltrate other Muslim organizations. And what I think is also worth mentioning is that in 1992, the first issue of the German language magazine Explizit was published, but discontinued after 2003 because of the ban. But I think it's worth noticing because it was the first printed example of their propaganda. What I find really interesting because my current focus in my work is on right-wing extremism is that in October 22, Hizb ut-Tahrir organized an event at the Technical University in Berlin on the impending war in Iraq. And they promoted an alliance between the Islamism and the neo-Nazi scene because what we saw was that the former chairman of the NPD, the most right-wing party we had at the time in Germany, Udo Vogt, as well as the neo-Nazi Horst Mahler came to that event and they tried to collaborate. And looking at the current discussions about the so-called white jihad, I think this is quite interesting because it happened over 20 years ago. But without further ado, we come to the most important part of the presentation, the ban in 2003. The most central aspect, maybe because it was a really important condition for that ban, was the elimination of the so-called religious privilege, the Religionsprivileg, in 2001. The idea behind this concept was that until then, religious communities and ideological associations were excluded from the scope of the application of the 1964 Associations Act on the basis of Article 9 of the Basic Law. So the idea was that religious groups were kind of saved, but it was the problem for the security authorities to deal with the problem if these religious communities became radical or even extremistic. And the goal of the law change was that the government wanted to create a more effective banning option against extremist religious communities. And so until then, we have two options that are more effective regarding extremist religious communities. I'm not a legal expert, that's why I will not go into detail on those two options, but just to mention them, we have the so-called ban on associations, das Vereinsgebot, which means that you ban a whole association, and the little more softer version is the so-called ban on activity, the Betätigungsverbot, which means that you can target a lot of people inside that association and ban their activities, but you also can target just a specific person or just 2 or 3 persons to set a ban on activities on that person or those persons. If we take a little look what happened after the elimination of the privilege of religions, we already had in 2001 the first ban on the so-called Caliphate the Caliphate state, if you would like to translate it. And 1 year later, the second organization, Al-Aqsa. And in 2003, we have the topic of today's discussions, the ban on Hizb ut-Tahrir. On the right side, you see for every organization the reasons for the ban. I will not go into detail for everyone, but if we look to the last one, Hizb ut-Tahrir, the reasons they mentioned were the violation of the idea of international understanding with regard to antisemitism, and also the advocacy of violence to enforce political interests. Just to maybe go one step back before we go 2 steps ahead, what are the consequences of a ban on associations in Germany? So how does it work and what does it mean? First, and the most obvious thing, the dissolution of the association. So you destroy pretty much the whole structure that was built up for a period of time. And with that decision, you also collect the funds of the associations. It will be confiscated by the state, and it will be used for charitable purposes. The third and fourth point are more into the future looking, because no successor or replacement organization may be founded, and also the emblems of the banned association may no longer be used. This is very important, because if the members of the banned association decide to form a new organization, it is much more easier for the law enforcement as well as security authorities to gather intel and to do a second ban. It is easier because of the process we had here, and you don't need to start at zero because you start with something. If we go to our case study, the Hizb ut-Tahrir in Germany, what happened after their ban? First of all, when the dissolution of the association, they developed decentralized structures. And you can see here the arguments against the ban is probably that the people still are active and they are still kind of able to work if they work decentralized. And what you also saw in the history of the organization is that they adapted to the new circumstances. So the activities changed, the recruitment methods changed, and also the way they influence people and they influence media, they share their information, everything changed. They were just avoiding criminal consequences. A good example is the spokesman, Mr. Assem. He moved to Austria because the ban didn't work there or doesn't work there. And he offers teaching circles there, and he's also running the first official German language website of Hizb ut-Tahrir there since 2006. If we following the path of the organization, 2012 we saw an upswing. Until that year, not so much happened, which someone can argue would be a positive effect of the ban. But in 2012, the former members found out the advantages of social media. And since then, they are quite heavily engaging on social media and try to share their content and their informations there. The result of those developments are that we now have 3 organizations which might be classified as successor organizations or shadow organizations from Hizb ut-Tahrir. The first one would be so-called Generation Islam, founded in 2014. 1 year later, we have Realität Islam, Reality Islam, and Muslim Interactive, founded in 2020, would be the third one. So what is new with those 3 organizations? There are 2 differences we could highlight here. The first one would be that they are less focusing on the foreign policy conflicts we have in the world, and also less focusing on the establishment of a caliphate. They are more focusing on current events and the political and social situation in Germany. So they are heavily commenting what is going on in Germany right now. And the second thing which changed is that the goal is to spread information and to change the discourse in Germany rather than to recruit new members. The strategy, and we come to that in a minute to show you a little bit what is going on right now, is that they have eloquent and charismatic speakers with quite a polite and moderate presence and not so aggressive, who find simple and quick answers on social media. So if you are familiar with the tools, for example, on Instagram with the Reels, you have quite a short period of time, you can present content. And if you have a very complex situation, you are not able to explain it in detail. You have to find short answers to that problem, and that's the strategy they use. But they are not only in the online world, but also in the offline world, and have effective media campaigns as well as demonstration, especially after the 7th of October last year. Let's go a little bit into some case studies. This is a screenshot of the Instagram profile of Generation Islam. You can see on the top that they have over 75,000 followers. What I would say is quite a number. And you can see that looking at the 3 recent posts, I took this screenshot this morning, so it's quite new. The left one would be that they proclaim that Netanyahu has a secret plan for ethnic cleansing. The second one would be a so-called massacre from the 29th of January. And on the right side, you have a short video clip of a guy probably explaining a possible two-state solution. So you can see the whole vibe of the content. And the second case study I would like to present is the so-called Realität Islam, the other big organization we had. And on the post, you can see it's very similar, but I would highlight 2 other aspects. The first one would be that in the highlight section of Instagram, on the 3rd spot, they have Telegram. And Telegram, as you probably know, as a social media tool, is not so much regulated like other social media platforms like Instagram, which means that you can share, let's say, heavier propaganda there without getting banned. And I find this very interesting because they directly share the link to their Telegram channel on Instagram. So they have a more softer version of propaganda on a more friendly social media platform like Instagram, but then you have the direct link to other social media platform. And the second thing, which I would highlight on top here, because I discussed this with a colleague of mine in the description of the Instagram channel. The second point, it is gegen Islamfeindlichkeit, which means against Islamophobia. And this is a trend my colleague and I see in, for example, this organization, that they proclaim to be world open, but if you criticize them, they come with the Islamophobia card. So this would be 2 recent case studies we have as potential shadow successors of Hizb ut-Tahrir in Germany. Without taking too much time, I think that's it for my presentation, and I'm looking forward to the questions and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Thank you very much. I think this is a very comprehensive presentation on Germany, and I think it's you highlight a dynamic that I think it's on everybody's mind, which is what happens after the ban. You can ban a group, but particularly a group of the nature of Hizb ut-Tahrir has the ability to be very flexible, regenerate itself under a different name. I think we saw that in the UK in the past when we had groups like al-Muhajirun who were banned, and then they just simply resurface with a different name. It's a bit of this cat and mouse game, which is very difficult to fight from the state's point of view. Now we got quite a few questions, so that makes my job as a moderator easy, and they're quite interesting. So let me get into some of them, and they're for everybody. So there's definitely space for everybody. We got a couple of questions from Michael Kenny, and Michael, who is University of Pittsburgh, is a very good researcher who's done great work, great field work on this scene in the UK. Has written a book on al-Muhajirun, has interviewed a lot of the members of the group, so he knows very well these dynamics, and he's asking a couple of questions. And here, to some degree, he's being asking questions to both Ghaffar and Elisa, and highlighting some potentially different positions that the two have. And I think I love that, because it triggers some debate. And when Michael says, he says, Ghaffar says HT is not a terrorist organization, but they're a violent organization. Meanwhile, in her book, Elisa argues that HT is not a violent organization. Who's right? Could Ghaffar elaborate with any specific examples on HT activists or supporters who are engaged in political violence, or who left the UK to join ISIS and Nusra or other militant groups? In what sense is HT Britain violent? By the way, al-Muhajirun is not HT, and it's a bit of a red herring to suggest HT Britain is violent because of al-Muhajirun. I don't think that's necessarily what either Ghaffar and I said. I think it's just obviously there's people who came from HT who then became al-Muhajirun founders. It's a bit different to come from that milieu, but that's a bit different. Another question from Michael, again, is sort of elaborating on this. For Elisa, you argue that HT has always rejected violence as a methodology to establish the caliphate, but how does this square with HT's position on the role of offensive jihad in spreading the caliphate? How about HT's position on potentially achieving power in a Muslim country, such as Pakistan, through a military coup? Wouldn't this involve violence? So I think it's on Ghaffar and Elisa now to battle it out on the very complex topic of HT's relationship to violence. I have a couple of other questions. There's one more specific for Felix, somebody who's asking to elaborate further on what you mentioned about that conference in Berlin in 2002, in which neo-Nazis attended, and more evidence is being asked as to the level of cooperation between HT and the neo-Nazis, whether it's just a couple of people attending the event or there was something deeper than that. Final question, which I'm going to ask to everybody who wants to answer, is what is the relationship between HT headquarters in Lebanon and the nation organization? So I guess it's a question more about the structure of the whole movement and on the independence of the individual branches in relation to the mother group apparently based in Lebanon. So let's keep the same order we had in the beginning, and so let's battle it out on the HT and violence debate. And Ghaffar, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't think Elisa and I disagree on this much, really. But I just want to get into a bit of nuance here. I don't know how much time to spend on this, but there's three distinct concepts that need to be understood here. First of all, that which is Islamically permissible. That's one thing. Second thing, that which the party adopts as its favored strategy. That's another thing. What is allowed or a good idea in certain circumstances is another thing. Right? So these are three distinct things. So when it comes to violence, Hizb ut-Tahrir's view is that it is allowed, it's permissible Islamically. They believe it is a good idea in certain circumstances, like in Israel, for example. However, it's not the party's adopted methodology, which means if you're a member of the party, you can't contradict party adoption, even if you privately disagree with it. You have to follow this. What I meant earlier by there being a rigid membership organization. The whole point of that is like a political party, you have to go with what the party says, even if you privately disagree. So if you privately believe that a terrorist attack is a good thing right now, you can't say that or do that because you're a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. You have to resign from the party in order to then express that view, right? So to clarify, this is why I say there are violent organizations, because they do believe in violence in certain circumstances, i.e. in Israel, as a good example. But they don't believe it's not their adopted methodology to stage terrorist attacks in order to achieve their end goal. Will a political revolution be violent? Inevitably. So it doesn't mean violence will never be used in the HT methodology at some point when they come close to taking power. It means the specific act of terrorism, which is in my view with theatre, you set up a bomb in order to create theatre, and they don't believe that is the tactic for them to achieve the goal. So I hope those nuances are clear. Many Hizb ut-Tahrir members have gone on to commit terrorist attacks, not as members of Hizb ut-Tahrir. They've been inspired by Hizb ut-Tahrir, endorsed that ideology, understood that it's permissible Islamically in their minds, and then left the group to commit terrorist attacks because they believed that was a better methodology. So they contradicted the party's adopted methodology. Umar Khan Sharif is a very good example of this. He's a man from Derby who was a supporter of Tahrir for many, many years. He eventually went to Israel and blew himself up tried to blow himself up in Riley's bar in Tel Aviv in 2003. He was presented by the media as a member of the Al-Quds Martyrs Brigade. He had been in Israel a few weeks though, so that's difficult to believe. Personally, I think he went freelance. I don't think that was a HT directed operation, but I believe he had adopted HT culture in that this is permissible in Israel, for example. So he wasn't contradicting HT from their point of view. Abu Bakr Muhammad, the founder of Tahrir, openly called for the assassination of John Major in the early 90s. And this is part of the reason why he came into trouble with the central command of Hizb ut-Tahrir. But he openly said we should just attack John Major, someone should kill John Major. So this is a statement he made whilst he was leader of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the UK. So there is a history of violence there. There isn't a history of HT members committing violence whilst being HT members, because that would contradict party adoption. I hope that makes sense. On the other issues around Nazism and fascism, I'll let obviously Felix elaborate more on that. What I would say is Hizb ut-Tahrir have recommended Nazi links in the past. They've recommended links to Nazi websites in the past because there's a lot they share in common: antisemitism, position to Western world order, various other things that I think they. So in a British context, I've not seen any evidence of them openly collaborating or communicating with them, but I think they've come across some of their content and they endorse it and send it around. That certainly happened. In terms of the HT structure globally, this is one of the reasons why there's so many splinters in HTs. If you look at Central Asia, for example, there's 3 different HTs just in Central Asia, right? Because you have HT that enters Central Asia, then you had the global HT that leading the global revolution. Then you had the HT that broke off from them and said, no, we just need the Central Asian caliphate. Then you had another HT that broke off from them and said, no, we just need a HT, a caliphate in the Fergana Valley. So you have these splinter groups. The reason why you have these splinter groups is because HT Central does have a very tight control and command structure, which means that HT Britain, for example, HT Pakistan, could do its own thing, how it behaves, where it says it can do its own thing to an extent. But ultimately, the final say is with HQ, which, ostensibly is in Lebanon or Beirut, or actually, I think the Palestinian territories, where the real leaders reside, in West Bank, in my opinion. But so they can't contradict what Central Command says. So they don't have autonomy. But that doesn't mean every bit of behavior is being directed centrally. So they're not centrally controlled on a daily basis, but they have to defer to Central Command if they do something which Central Command doesn't like. That is, but what happens with that is people disagree, and then you have a splinter group. It's like just a splinter group. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay, great, perfect. Elisa.
Yeah, so thanks for the very interesting questions. I think I'll try with one single answers to get to different questions. So I agree with Ghaffar to a certain extent about the position of Hizb ut-Tahrir towards violence. I think the key, not to fall into sort of speculations of what is the position is of the group, is basically to have a clear distinction of how the group operates in the West and what aims and final goals it has in Western states, and how the group operates in the Middle East and what is the final aim in the Middle East. So it has been anticipated, the group has a 3-step strategy where the first step is to create a nucleus of people that are normally, in high position in the society, and to cultivate them, on specific values, culture them, and make them familiar, make them espousing their Aqidah, their doctrine and core values. Then step 2, to use Hizb ut-Tahrir's jargon and words, as in their adopted literature, is knock at the society's door. So the same nucleus would then go and proselytize the wider society. And then step 3, once everybody is basically in the society is convinced that the reestablishment of the caliphate in Muslim majority countries is the right thing to do, then what is going to happen in Muslim majority country is that military authority and political authority will then hand over the power to the people, the members of Hizb ut-Tahrir, almost voluntarily. And so there will be a non-bloody, or at least, a mild revolution. This is the perfect scenario, the ideal scenario. Now, what happens in the West is basically mostly phase 1 and phase 2. So basically, the idea is that members of the group would try to win the hearts and mind of Muslims in the West to then work ideologically, in a war of ideas, for the reestablishment of the caliphate in the Muslim majority lands. But at the same time, in Muslim majority areas, revolutions and the use of violence in these revolutions, if they are, conducive to the caliphate, they are accepted. So I think, for me, studying the group in the West, it is plausible to say that the group in the West does not use violence as a method. But as I was saying before in my presentation, it is also quite controversial, the fact that violence is a methodology that will lead to a revolution. Therefore, the reestablishment of the caliphate in specific areas in Muslim majority country is accepted. So it's a bit of both. As we were saying before, it has a sort of a twofold strategy according to where we're looking at the actorship of the group. If it's in the West, it's a thing. If it's in the Middle East, it's another thing. And this is what caused the ban in Pakistan, because of, you know, this open, again, challenge to the military and the attempt of a coup as well. So I hope this answers a little bit the question, some added up to what Ghaffar has said as well. I also want to briefly address the question asked by the person who's doing the PhD, exploring ISIS as well, and what is basically the difference between ISIS and Hizb ut-Tahrir. I think the main difference, again, looking at the West and also the idea of the caliphate, lays in the methodology. Again, Hizb ut-Tahrir rejects the use of violence in the West as a mean to reestablish the caliphate, and also conversely to ISIS, the aim is not to create a global caliphate and Islamize the world, but is to re-establish the caliphate in specific areas known as the Majal areas. And then lastly, if I can address the question in the UK about the Terrorism Act and the provision, and how the ban, if the ban is going to be implemented, you know, seamlessly, I would say no. It's history has taught us, you know, in all the different bans in all the different countries. Of course, Hizb ut-Tahrir are quite creative in, you know, finding ways to continue operating, although, you know, change of names are maybe not the solutions, but they have a huge network of sister organizations, schools, and, you know, affiliation with different mosques that make the difference, you know, in trying to implement a ban, not mentioning the huge amount of writings, leaflets, campaigns that they've gone on, their presence on university campuses. So this is definitely something that will require some time, and I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And I think you and Ghaffar did a very good job at answering addressing the very complex topic of the relationship with violence. And there's a reason why governments throughout the West have struggled with HT and what to do about it, how to categorize it, and it's because of this complexity of views. We're going slightly above our time, so Felix, I will ask you to be relatively short in addressing the specific question was asked to you about neo-Nazis, but also the question that is, you know, appropriately asked is, what is the German government doing about this replacement follow-up organizations? I mean, is it that easy to then go around the ban and just simply call yourself, you know, some other thing, and the German government is not reactive to it? Somebody else, Clive Walker, points out that in the UK, provisions were passed to allow for name changes to be banned with much less formality. So the idea that makes, you know, it's a game that we all understand, but you can simply just change your name, and it should be a bit more difficult than that to avoid detection and punishment from the state. So Felix, in a minute or so.
I will try to be quick. The first question, the relationship between Hizb ut-Tahrir and the right-wing party NPD was not that strong. They had, like in 2002 and 2003, some events together. They visited each other. There was an interview by a spokesman of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the so-called Deutsche Stimme, a newspaper magazine from the NPD organization, but nothing more. I think it was a very short period of time. And the common, like the reason why they collaborated was pretty much they both had an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and anti-US worldview that united them for a short period of time. The second question, what can German authorities do? Our national domestic intelligence service is monitoring as Hizb ut-Tahrir as well as the potential follow-up organizations. So we could use another ban, but that's also the question of the efficiency, if it will work. We also have, like with the federal system, problems by sharing information from one local state to another. Therefore, we established in 2007 a joint internet center, which monitors all the internet activities in all states, which I think is very good. And last but not least, I think also in the field of prevention, especially how to use the internet with content like this. It's very important for younger people, and the state, the government should focus on that and give more money for projects to help with those kind of problems.
Thank you, Felix. I want to thank you. I want to thank Elisa. I want to thank Ghaffar for really being very knowledgeable and very informative about a very complex topic. I think we all come out of this knowing a bit more about a very, very difficult topic. And I think there'll be more conversations about HT in Western countries in the months to come. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank everybody on the team at POE for organizing the event, which seemed to have worked seamlessly. And I want to thank, of course, everybody who attended. Thank you very much for that. Please just check out our Twitter feed, our newsletter, our emails. We have several events coming up. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us. And I hope to see you all soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.